Hi, everyone. We are very glad to be here. My name is Mónica Gabriela Ortega Macedo, and today I'm here with Dr. Alma Leticia Ferado García. We both are from the Universidad Autónoma del Estado de México, and today we're presenting the research Formulaic language, a pragmalinguistic strategy to overcome constraints in speaking activities. This presentation is organized in 5 sections, and first we're going to talk about the problematic, then the objectives, theoretical framework, methodological framework, and finally discussion and conclusion.
Okay, so in this presentation, we're going to talk about this project that Mónica presented in order to obtain her degree in a master's in English teaching. In the main problem, what she saw was she noticed that teachers had some misconceptions about the communicative approach. So she wanted to analyze some more about that. Also, she observed some inaccurate teaching practices that she wanted to improve. Then also, in her main problem, she saw the development of unauthentic speaking activities in the classroom. For example, there was an overuse of memorization, there was few interaction among the students, and there was no purpose of communication. So she wanted to improve that situation. As well, students showed a poor ability to speak in English in complex activities. For example, to maintain, to overcome, and to restore communication. So there was something that needed to be done. The general objective that she proposed for her thesis was to use formulaic language in speaking activities to develop the pragmatic competence of first-grade secondary school students. There are some specific objectives, but we're not going to talk about them now. The hypothesis she presented, or she planned, is if formulaic language is used by students, then their pragmatic competence will improve. And that's what she analyzed at the end of this research. Then, to start with her method, her chapters, the theoretical framework was first, and she had to establish first what formulaic language is. Here we have some quotes about that. When we communicate, a certain number of prefabricated phrases, from 1/3 to 1/2 to be precise, are found in written or spoken speech. This was said by Conklin and Schmidt in 2012. Also, they say, or they believe, that formulaic language is a linguistic strategy that allows compensation for cognitive limitations when using the language. I would like to add this quote by Ray in 2002. Formulaic language is a sequence, continuous or discontinuous, of words or other elements which is or appears to be prefabricated, that is, stored, retrieved whole from memory at the time of use, rather than being subject to generation or analysis by the language grammar. For example, it is when they learn chunks or pieces of language. For example, can I help you with? Can I, please stand up? May I come in? So she chose some of them, but we're going to see them later.
Well, another concept what was important to understand is the role that formulaic language plays in speaking activities. And well, I found out that according to Ortega, there are at least 5 ways in which this language helps students to participate in speaking activities. For example, it makes the thinking process more efficient. It also gives students a certain amount of free time so they can think what they have to say next or how they want to say it, or which phrases they can use to participate in speaking activities. It gives spoken language the impression of fluency and familiarity, even if students use short or basic phrases. And this is because they use prefabricated phrases that most speakers understand. It enables the achievement of goals in communicative tasks. And let's remember that formulaic language are these prefabricated phrases that that the students can use in different situations. For example, when they want to get information, give information, or ask for help. And for these same reasons, this language scaffolds learners' language to avoid mistakes, because, as we say, they are ready-made chunks of language. And with these concepts in mind, I decided to use Hatami's model to teach formulaic language. This model consists of 3 stages, and the first one is to raise students' awareness about the role of formulaic language, about the role that formulaic language plays in speaking activities. And this is that students understand that if they use these chunks of language, they can have like free time to think what they want to say next. And for example, also their thinking process is more efficient, or the things that I explained before. The second stage is to engage students in authentic learning opportunities and in a safe environment. And the last one is the practice. So students need to practice the use of formulaic language also in authentic situations.
About the methodology she followed, all the steps, first, I'd like to mention that it was a mixed methodology because she considered both qualitative and quantitative parts in her research. About the quantitative, the students sit an exam, an initial and a final exam. So she graded them and she had all the grades and how they improved. So all this about the numbers. Another part was the qualitative part, and in this case, she had an observation paper, yes, with a checklist for all the role plays that her students performed in class. She followed an action research, yes, based on Mertle's model of the 2009. And about the population, she took a sample of 5 students from first grade of secondary school. And here I'm going to tell you more about the population. Then this research was carried out in a public secondary school in the state of Mexico. It was all with first grade students, and the topics she chose were from the syllables established by the SEP here in Mexico. And then of the first grade of these secondary school students, there were 4 groups. From these 4 groups, she was teaching 3 of them, and then it was decided that Group B and Group D were going to be control groups, and Group C was going to be the experimental group.
Now, in this diagram, we can see the teaching intervention, the development of my teaching intervention that had 2 instruments. And it had 3 stages according to Hatami's model to teach formulaic language. The input of this teaching intervention was a battery of 27 phrases of formulaic language that I took from the textbook, Yes We Can, Secondary 1 by Richmond Publisher. So I started this teaching intervention applying a diagnostic exam. After that, we have stage 1, and this stage is an introductory stage. So students were able to recognize what is a public service, which is the topic that I took from the syllabus, which is to give and receive information in public services. So basically here we talk about what is a public service, what public services they can find in their community, and some vocabulary related to this topic. Then in this part where it says stage number 2, well, this corresponds to the first stage of Hatami's model to teach formulaic language, in which it's important to raise the students' awareness about the importance of this language. So in here, basically, I expose the students to 4 conversations about people giving and receiving information about public services. And well, they listen to the conversation, they order the dialogues, and they answer reading comprehension questions, but also it was important because they noticed that, for example, in conversation number 1 about a hospital, the speakers use phrases such as, can you help me? I need, thank you, goodbye. And in conversation number 2 about people in a library, these speakers also use these same phrases. So they understand like the importance of knowing these phrases. Then here in my diagram, it says stage number 3 that corresponds to stage number 2 of Hatami's model. And in this, it's important to engage students in authentic learning opportunities. And in here, students participated in short dialogues where they interchange information about public services using the phrases we analyzed in the first stage. Then we have the third stage, according to Hatami's model, which says that we have to, well, students have to practice the use of formulaic language. And I think it was important so that they participated in role plays. So they had time to write a script, to practice like the movements they wanted to incorporate. And well, yeah. And then I applied the final exam. And finally, we have another role play. Okay, in this role play, this is the second instrument in which I applied a checklist observation to see how students were doing, how they were using the phrases of formulaic language, and how these were like helping them to participate in these speaking activities. It is important to say that these two role plays are quite different because in the first one, they have the opportunity to write a script, to practice, and in the second one was more spontaneous. Well, in this chart, we can see like the relationship between Hatami's model to teach formulaic language and the products I obtained in my teaching intervention. So in the awareness raising stage, students listen to conversations and then they write they made a catalog with the expressions of the conversation. In the second stage, students, as I said, participated in 5-minute conversations, interchanging information. And finally, in the third stage, they participated in role plays. And now, as we said, we have 2 control groups and 1 experimental group. And of course, like the activities they were involved in were different. And for students for control group, in the first stage, they only answer comprehension questions to infer the meaning of phrases of formulaic language. They didn't do the catalog of expressions. In stage number 2, students only read the phrases out loud of the conversations, and they didn't participate in these 5-minute conversations. And finally, in stage number 3, they participated in role plays as students from experimental group. So this was similar in both control and experimental group. And now, well, with the instruments, we have the first one, which was the exam. It was applied before and after the instruction. It had the 27 phrases of formulaic language. And the purpose, it was to evaluate previous knowledge and the influence of the teaching intervention. Here we can see some of the results. And we can see that control group B had a 5% of improvement after the teaching intervention. In the experimental group C, we can see there is a 19% of improvement, and control group B, an 11%. So we can see that experimental group C had the highest improvement of the 3. Now, in terms of the qualitative instrument, is the checklist observation to role play, and it was a semi-structured observation. It was carried out after the final exam. And now I'm going to present the results in 4 categories. These 4 categories are the poses that the extent, well, yeah, like the poses students have or don't have when they participate in speaking activities using formulaic language. How easy it is for students to remember phrases of formulaic language, like how often students say unfinished phrases or utterances, and the grammatical mistakes they make when they use formulaic language. So here we have like some observations or findings with the students of the experimental group. And according to the first category, we can see that the poses that the students of the experimental group, they were short and always followed by a sentence. So we can see that the use of formulaic language helped them to have a natural like flow when they were speaking. Also, some of the poses they make, the students from the experimental group, were used to restore communication. For example, they were aware they were making a mistake, so they make a pause and they correct like the mistake they were having. It was easy for students of this group, for 3 students of this group, to remember phrases easily. And this was reflected in their linguistic and non-linguistic aspects of the language, because since they didn't have like that cognitive esa carga cognitiva, they didn't have that esa carga cognitiva, they were able to make some body movements, to incorporate realia, or I don't know, to be like, they weren't like that, they hadn't like that stress, like thinking on what I have to say and what I have to do. Also, well, students from the experimental group, well, one student from this group didn't say like a complete phrase, but because he realized he had made a mistake, so he stopped, he didn't finish the phrase, but then he continued with the conversation using like the correct phrase or the correct idea. And well, there was only one student who couldn't say like a complete phrase in the role play. And well, the use of formulaic language also benefits students, because then they don't make a lot of grammatical mistakes. They are only minor, and most of them were made in phrasal constraints. These phrasal constraints are, for example, the ones that the students have to complete with a certain word. For example, I need a book, I need a medicine. Okay, this is an example of a phrasal constraint. And also some of the grammatical mistakes the students made, it's when they didn't know or they didn't use the correct form of the verb, again, in these phrasal constraints. And well, here we can see some pictures of students from the control group B, and we can see this student who is like hesitating, he's nervous, his facial expression shows like he doesn't know what to say or how to continue the role play, as well as this girl who is trying to remember something. Then a student from experimental group C, we can see that this girl is so confident that she even can use like some realia. And also these 2 students shake hands to demonstrate that they feel comfortable taking part in these speaking activities. Then in the other control group D, we also see a boy in here who is like reading something from his hand because he is not sure about how to participate in this role play. And also this other boy who is like reading or trying to remember something. And well, I want to read this this idea that says, it is expected that the use of formulaic language enables learners to process language speedily and easily, decreasing the mental effort learners do at the moment of speaking. This allows them to pay attention to other aspects of the language, as we saw like in the previous pictures and in the results of the role play observation. Now, I'm going to explain the discussion of these results, and this discussion is organized in 3 sections. First, what I noticed is that it's important to have it's important to have a well-organized teaching intervention with some important elements. For example, I think that to raise students' awareness about the importance of formulaic language, well, it's very important because they understand the purpose of using this specific language. Also, when students feel like they are using the language in a safe environment, they are more likely to improve their language. And well, it is also important to have activities that are centered in the student and not in the teacher. Well, another finding that I had from this research is that pauses can be a natural part of conversation only if they are followed by a fluent phrase or a complete phrase. Also, I found out that formulaic language helps students to avoid grammatical mistakes and to say complete phrases. And the things that I identify, or the aspects that I identified that help the students to dominate these phrases of formulaic language, it was the way I organized my teaching intervention, that most of the activities were like in context, and well, that also there were some phrases for them it was easier for them to learn because of the level of transparency. This means that they are similar either in sound or like in meaning to their mother tongue. And now we're going to talk about the conclusions we had about this research.
Okay, the conclusions are divided in different areas or topics. The first one is about the teaching intervention she had with these groups. And we can say that the implementation of this 3-stage lesson plan that includes awareness raising, control, and semi-control practice stage can prevent the speaking difficulties addressed in this research. Now, about the pauses in the speech, we can conclude that the students demonstrate to be fluent by remembering phrases easily or by incorporating pauses as a natural part of speaking or of their speech. This is only possible if pauses are short and followed by another phrase. Another part of the conclusions is about the grammatical mistakes. And in this area, we can say that the students who are familiar with the use of formulaic language are less likely to make grammatical mistakes. However, this does not ensure that the students are aware of the syntactic rules of language they are using. Another important conclusion raised from this research is about the phrases dominated by students. And we can conclude that the principal factors that influence the learning process were semantic transparency, similar sounds to mother tongue, and short length. Other factors were predictable word order, number of times exposed to the phrases, and design of activities that allow them to interact using the phrases of formulaic language autonomously.
Okay. And now we have like 2 last conclusions, and one has to do with the cognitive strategy. And well, I think I conclude that the use of formulaic language, it is the strategy of the brain that allows compensation for cognitive limitation. The automatization of the language enables learners to do more things at a time. And also regarding the how easy it was for students to remember phrases, I can say that the automatization of this language enabled learners to use the set of memorized phrases to take part in real-time interaction. And well, the last conclusion could be that this study certainly adds to our understanding of the influence that a three-stage teaching intervention can have on the use of formulaic language, since it enabled to overcome breakdowns of communication.
And on behalf of Mónica and myself, I would like to thank you for watching this video. And I hope we can see you at the Encuentro con Ponentes. And then we can talk more about this research. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye, and enjoy this international conference. Thank you.